Here is 10 Downing Street, the official residence of the British Prime Minister.
On Wednesday, the 22nd of May 2024, then Prime Minister Rishi Sunak walked out that front door and announced that he was calling a general election. On paper, it perhaps wasn't the worst political speech ever. It recalled some of the support that Sunak had provided to workers and small businesses during the COVID pandemic, and threw a bit of shade at Keir Starmer, his opponent in the upcoming vote.
In practice, though, Sunak cut a pretty pathetic figure.
Propped up by a lectern as the rain pelted him from above, someone kept knocking the camera, meaning the official broadcast of this historic moment just looked kind of amateurish. Worse still, a protester in the adjoining street had set up a PA system and started blasting "Things Can Only Get Better," a song by one-hit wonders D-Ream, which had previously been used as an election anthem by the Labour Party. Watching Sunak try to win the affections of the British people, whilst being both metaphorically drowned out by an anthem of his political opponents, and literally drowned out by some good old-fashioned British precipitation, felt rather fitting for a Prime Minister whose tenure had been, honestly, kind of forgettable. It was even more apt for a political party, the Conservative Party, whose 14-year rule over the UK has left the country in tatters. Poorer, nastier, with crumbling schools, bankrupt cities, polluted waterways, and the highest housing-to-income ratio since the Victorian era. On aggregate, the UK remains one of the richest countries in the world. But it rarely feels that way anymore. Ask anyone that lives here, and they'll attest to the fact that everything is just hideously expensive now. Our politics is pretty openly corrupt and chaotic, and the country has been gripped by a general sense of malaise, an understanding that everything is just kind of bad. But how did we get here? How did a country which used to be a pioneer in science, technology, art, and education come to have human poo floating down its rivers? And how do we come back from this?
This is the story of how the British Conservative Party subjected its own country to 3 separate yet interconnected experiments, each of which would tear away a different part of the country's political, social, and economic fabric.
This is the story of how Britain became a poor country. This is David Cameron. On the 11th of May 2010, David Cameron enters 10 Downing Street for the first time.
England always had poo in the river, let's be real. Yes and no. They did, and they handled it, and then they fucked it up again. Poo in the they-thems river has always been a fucking major issue, except they privatized it. And of course, when they did that, the private corporations did not take the necessary precautions, because why the fuck would they? There's also no regulation on it because it's like friendly businesses that they gave it to.
As the newly elected Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. His election win hasn't been a particularly convincing one. The party Cameron leads, the Conservatives, have only managed to win 306 seats in the House of Commons. That's 20 seats short of an outright majority. Claiming the top spot has thus required him to go cap in hand to this guy, Nick Clegg, the leader of the UK's notionally centrist Liberal Democrat Party. After 5 days of negotiations, Cameron and Clegg have agreed to form a coalition government, in which Cameron will serve as Prime Minister and Clegg as his deputy.
Coalition governments in which multiple parties come together to govern collaboratively are exceptionally rare in the UK. The last time this happened was during the 1930s and 1940s, when all the major parties in Parliament came together to present a united front during the Second World War. As David Cameron crosses the threshold of number 10, however, he perhaps feels like this collaborative arrangement might serve him well.
See, David Cameron is, at this point at least, a genre of centre-right politician which would soon go wildly out of fashion. He's certainly a great supporter of typical conservative causes such as tax cuts, privatisations and reductions in welfare spending, but he's also desperate to at least present himself as youthful, environmentally conscious and broadly socially liberal. Some of this social liberalism is perhaps sincere. As Prime Minister, he'll soon push for the UK to adopt equal marriage, despite solid opposition from other Conservatives. He'll also lead a revolution in offshore wind and had already managed to promote greater gender equality among political candidates within his...
Bro, I mean, things have gotten much worse in general, but it's just something to remember that, like, this is why it's not even a question about, like, American Republican Party versus the Conservative Party in the UK.
Party. Although, this being the 2000s, the British press had soon christened them Cameron's Cuties, which, yeah. Perhaps more suspect is the idea which sits at the centre of Cameron's vision for Britain, the Big Society.
The Big Society is intended, in part, as a corrective to that eternal conservative bogeyman of big government. Cameron's pitch is that he's going to empower individuals, charities and community groups to take a more active role in civic life. In its opposition to big government, however, the Big Society doesn't stop at cutting red tape and government oversight. All that charity work is intended to make up for a brutal programme of cuts to public services.
It's fair to say that the UK's finances aren't exactly in the best of shape at this point. This is just 2 years after the global financial crisis of 2008, and the country is still very much dealing with the aftermath. In order to prevent the complete collapse of the country's banking and housing sectors, the previous government has paid to effectively nationalise 2 banks and shelled out to buy significant ownership stakes in 2 more. A fall in real terms earnings, along with people being more cautious with how they spend their money, means tax receipts have also taken a hit. The state of affairs is perhaps best captured by a handwritten note left by Labour's outgoing Chief Secretary of the Treasury to his successor, which reads simply, "Dear Chief Secretary, I'm afraid there is no money. Best regards, and good luck." Over the next 5 years, Cameron references this note often. He sometimes waves it about at campaign events. Not only does the memo help to portray Cameron's political rivals in the Labour Party as having a carefree attitude when it comes to taxpayer cash, the notion that the country is flat broke provides a rationale for taking a pretty uncompromising approach to cutting government spending.
As things stand, the UK government is running a budget deficit of £150 billion. Cameron and his government unveil a plan to cut that number as quickly as possible.
It doesn't matter that interest rates are at their lowest since 1694 and that the cost of the government's borrowing is effectively zero. Cameron and Osborne want to slash the size of the state. And there has perhaps never been a better excuse to do so. The package of spending cuts implemented over the next few years includes reforms to the welfare system, which make it harder for disabled people and sick people to access support. It involves a 13% cut in funding for schools and colleges, as well as a 40% cut to funding for universities, made up for by shifting the burden of tuition costs onto students through a tripling of fees. Anyone working in the public sector has their pay frozen for 2 years, and subsequent annual pay rises capped at 1%. Police funding, defence spending and public transport spending all receive swinging cuts, whilst the Royal Mail, the UK's postal service, is sold off to investors at a bargain basement price.
It's hard to get across in just a short section of one video quite how wide-ranging Cameron, Clegg and Osborne's attack on public spending is. There's not a single part of British public life that goes untouched. And judged on its own terms, it's pretty successful.
By 2015, the deficit has dropped by more than a third. Nevertheless, the effects on the economy and country more broadly are mixed. Throughout the 5 years of the coalition government, George Osborne repeatedly tells Brits that, quote, "We're all in this together when it comes to this attempt to fix public finances." Nevertheless, the pain of austerity is felt strongest by the poorest in society. In fact, at the same time as work for ordinary people is becoming more precarious and less well paid, corporation tax, the tax paid by companies on their profits, is gradually brought down from 28% to just
Thank God.
20%. By
I love fixing the deficit.
2015, the grim reality of Cameron's big society is evident in the rise of food banks. 5 years ago, food banks had been essentially non-existent in the UK. The country's most prominent food bank charity had handed out just 40,000 packages that entire year. But by 2015, that figure has risen to more than 1 million. The The result of Cameron's policies, then, is not some utopian empowerment of local communities, but one in which people who previously could have found support and guidance in the welfare system becoming reliant on charity to feed themselves and their families.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, as the impact of Cameron and Clegg's cuts begin to be felt, there's a sense that these policies might not be super popular amongst the general public. The coalition years are beset with protests and strikes and demonstrations by various groups affected by the austerity regime.
And if it's easy to disregard such activists as a vocal minority, the notion that UK voters might be experiencing a touch of buyer's remorse quickly becomes evident in the polls too. By the end of 2010, the Labour Party is...
It's so funny because they did this, and then for 14 years, they kept voting in Tories. It's great. Someone in the chat said, Aynı AKP amına koyayım. Exactly. It is a bit similar. It is an experience I know well from Turkey.
Have taken Cameron's Conservatives in the polls, a lead they maintain consistently for the next 4 years. The right-wing press mercilessly lampooned the Labour Party leader, Ed Miliband, for his slightly meek, awkward aura, including through publishing this unflattering photo of him eating a bacon sandwich. Nevertheless, while Labour's polling lead drops, they still retain a slight lead.
On the day of the 2015 general election, it looks very much like Cameron might be a one-term wonder. The results are certainly set to be close, but there's a chance that Ed Miliband and the Labour Party might be able to piece together an alternative coalition of smaller parties to oust Cameron and the Conservatives from power. Then, that evening, all those predictions turn out to be false.
When the results are counted, the Conservatives turn out not to have lost support, but gained it. Their 306 MPs have become 331. Enough to end their pact with the Liberal Democrats and govern solo. Everyone involved in the entire polling industry spends the next year or so hanging their heads in shame. Among several proposed reasons for why they got it so wrong is the so-called shy Tory effect. This is the idea that some voters, when asked, will be hesitant to admit that they're going to vote Conservative. Presumably something about not wanting to appear pro-food bank and declining life expectancy or something. In some ways, then...
This is something I will never understand. It's like, you understand that the policies... By the way, this literally happened with Donald Trump too. But you understand that the policies are bad. Why do you want it then? Why do you vote for it? Like, it's just so fucking stupid. Like, you're like, oh yeah, the party that brought us fucking food banks and austerity, I know they suck, but I'm still gonna vote for them, but I'm also embarrassed to admit that. Then don't vote for them! Like, what is wrong with you? What the fuck is wrong with your brain? Just don't vote for them, dude. Don't do that. Just don't even vote. Don't vote. Don't go out and vote. I don't get it. Like, oh my God, people are so fucking stupid.
Cameron exits the 2015 general election more confident than ever. He has an outright majority in Parliament, and a reassuring sense that there might be greater support for his austerity agenda than there sometimes appears.
That confidence is about to...
Stop blaming people. Workers are uneducated politically and don't have an alternative. That's so funny. I love when socialists are just like, yeah, dude, the workers have intellectual disabilities, dude. Like, don't ever fucking criticize them. You don't understand. They're like babies, okay? They're like adults with baby brains. They're car crash victims. They have John Fetterman brain. Like, thank you for infantilizing the working class, but socialistly, okay?
Undercut, however, by a new threat. The rise of the Brexiteers. To understand this next part of the story, we need to take another look at this graph.
There's a lot that pollsters got wrong when calculating voting patterns prior to the 2015 general election. But one thing they did spot correctly was a steady rise in support for the UK Independence Party, or UKIP for short. UKIP are a right-wing party who, in 2015, are led by this guy, Nigel Farage. And while they maintain a broad manifesto of policies, their primary mission is to get...
Bro, they just straight up lied about everything. The entire Brexit manifesto is just built on straight up lies. And it hits so fucking hard. People were like, oh, hell yeah. I'm looking for this dumb shit. It's awesome.
The UK to leave the European Union, which isn't an entirely fringe desire. Support for the EU has fluctuated constantly since the UK joined the bloc back in the 1970s, particularly as a result of its impact on immigration.
See, under EU rules, citizens of any member state have the right to move to and work in any other member state. And since the early 2000s, net migration to the UK from within the EU has been trending further and further upwards.
All of the available research suggests that this has a positive impact on the UK economy. But in an era of economic downturn, immigrants have become an easy scapegoat. David Cameron has often joined in on this scapegoating, making high-profile promises to bring net migration down into the tens of thousands. Nevertheless, support for UKIP continues to rise. And in 2014, one of Cameron's own MPs even defects to the party in protest at his perceived inaction on the issue. The result is that Cameron decides that he has to do something in order to avoid losing more support. His solution? To pinch UKIP's own key policy.
Capitulating to the right, capitulating to fascist right-wingers and their stupid fucking policies. Sure, it'll keep you in power. Well, not you specifically, maybe just not you specifically. The best decision by a politician in the modern era. Yeah, like historic run for David Cameron specifically. This was the start of a sequence of L's. I mean, dude, this literally is the starting point of what you saw last night. It wasn't just the austerity. This led to him withdrawing, resigning, whatever. Then afterwards, there was the sequence of Tory admins that also fucked up majorly. Most of it framed around Brexit. Well, not the last three, but
of holding a referendum on EU membership. A nationwide vote presenting Brits with a binary choice: in or out.
Cameron's reason for calling the vote is because he feels pretty certain that the Remain campaign is going to win. He wants to prove that whatever concerns might exist around immigration, that wanting to leave the EU is little more than a fringe obsession of a vocal minority. This, of course, is not what happens.
The first blow to Cameron's plan comes just a day after he announces the referendum. That afternoon, he receives a text message from this guy, Boris Johnson. Having been to both school and university with Cameron, Johnson had previously been something of an ally. But in his message that morning, Johnson declares whatever truce there might have been between them to be over, and says that he'll be throwing his full weight behind the Leave campaign.
Johnson soon emerges as the Leave team's de facto leader, and agitating to leave the EU turns out to be a whole lot easier than campaigning to stay in. It might be that all the available evidence suggests that staying a member of the European Union is the more prosperous economic choice for the UK, but explaining why is kind of boring and technocratic. Whatever the evidence suggests, it's just kind of difficult to inspire some kind of deep adoration for a somewhat bureaucratic trading bloc.
The Leave campaign by...
It's also infinitely easier to fucking lie. In many ways, the Brexit campaign, once again, wasn't just about leaving because Polish people were coming in. It was about leaving because Polish people were taking your jobs. Even if they didn't actually take your fucking jobs, right? It was more so about the economic instability that you felt in your heart. And you were like, maybe it's because of a fucking Polish person that I'm feeling this way. But more importantly than that, it literally had refunding the NHS baked into the fucking campaign. I mean, it's an abject lie. Nigel Farage would never fund the NHS. You're out of your fucking mind. But that was what they were claiming. They were like, oh, dude, the European Union cost the UK $700 gorillion a day. We could be using that on the NHS. And then people were like, oh my God, that's so stupid. Why are we giving $700 gorillion to the EU? We should be giving $700 gorillion to the NHS. I like this idea that Nigel Farage is making. Okay? You have to understand that is a direct way to say like, oh, we should be funding the NHS. Okay, it wasn't gorillion, it was 350 million, which also was a lie, by the way. Yeah. That was also a lie. The fact that the EU is sending 350 million pounds a week, or that you would fund the NHS with that. Did it get funded? Brexit happened. Yeah, they're too busy using those funds to fund Israel.
Contrast is free to weave a highly emotive narrative, which stitches together a whole range of distinct issues under the banner, Take Back Control. This notion of taking back control is partly about immigration.
Yeah, it was just that. That's it. It was because, dude, that's it. Military-aged men That's it. That's the real reason why they did this shit. Okay? It banged because there are so many goddamn racists.
But it also taps into a whole range of anxieties about the country's declining influence on the world stage, and even cuts to public services, which are reframed as no longer being a political choice made by the Conservative Party, but the result of a need to send great sums of cash to Europe.
In fact, the success of the take back control narrative is that voters can kind of project whatever they want onto it. It allows Brits to take whatever their frustrations might be with contemporary Britain, no matter whether they are real or relevant, and redirect that anger at the EU.
And it works. At 4:40 AM on the 24th of June 2024, the BBC announces that Britain has voted to leave the European Union.
It was such a laughably massive L for England, dude. Holy shit. Another position that I was absolutely fucking correct on, and never, not even for a fucking moment, backpedaled on at all. Every single there were so many leftists who were yelling at me. They were like, well, what about Lexit? What about Lexit? There's a lot of leftists that want to do Brexit, but for different reasons. And I was like, you're fucking wrong and you're stupid. Okay. The EU partnership agreement for the UK was already like set up in a way that was only beneficial to the UK. Like imagine having a beneficial trade agreement with your partner right there, with your partner in your ass cheeks, and you're like, I'm gonna f this bag up. I'm sad I didn't want you on TYT back then. I work in construction and I voted remain, but since Brexit, my wages have doubled. Yeah, they got the polls out, dude. The one guy that's doing well in the UK. I mean, that's awesome. Get your money up. Get your bag, king. I suspect that if your wages doubled, your rent is like quadrupled now.
By 51.89% to 48.11%. Throughout the referendum campaign, David Cameron had promised that he'd continue to serve as Prime Minister regardless of the outcome of the vote. Not 10 hours passes after polls close, however, before he reneges on that pledge entirely and resigns. It's interpreted by many as a somewhat sad attempt to escape the consequences of his own actions, and in so being, sets the stage for plenty of other prime ministerial resignations to come. The logical assumption following Cameron's resignation might have been that Boris Johnson would take over as PM. He had, after all, effectively led the Leave campaign, and this would be the perfect opportunity to see his vision for a post-EU Britain through. After days of speculation, however, he bottles it at the last minute, and the leadership contest is won instead by this woman, Theresa May. One of May's stock slogans during her campaign to become Prime Minister is Brexit means Brexit. The challenge is that no one's entirely sure what
Another great
Brexit means. The narrative of taking back control had been intentionally vague, but actually leaving the EU would require concrete, specific policy.
Given the desperately thin margin on which the referendum was won, the logical thing to do is perhaps to find some kind of compromise. Maybe the UK ceases to be a full member of the EU and introduces some additional controls on immigration.
Come on, England, score some fucking goals. Brexit means Brexit, yeah. Fucking hell. Let's go, England. That's what it is.
But retains a close trading relationship with the bloc. The problem is that the referendum debate has only really hardened opinion on all sides.
For many Brexit-supporting members of the Conservative,
It was also pretty funny that people thought that like this would destroy the European Union. That was another thing that people kept telling me, like, no, you don't understand. Like, this is going to destroy the European Union, and that's why it's good. It's like, that was my answer to the people when they said things like that.
Conservative Party, the only acceptable way forward is to make a complete break from Europe and to seek closer ties with the US instead. Opposing these are a smattering of pro-Europe activists and MPs across the major parties who are dead set on frustrating the process entirely. May's one point of solace is that public support for the Conservatives has been steadily rising since the referendum, as voters who had been drifting towards UKIP have come rushing.
Honestly, it's because, and I'm sorry to say this, there's a lot of stupid people in England, just like there's a lot of stupid people in America. Two sides of the same coin, two sides of the same shitty pond. That's it. That's literally it. They're like, oh, bad things? More bad things? I love it. Thank you. Thank you for the more bad things, please. It's almost like, you know, our forefathers Like me saying ours is kind of funny here, but like, you know, America's original forefathers are British. The Angloid skull must be studied for peasant brain. The Angloid peasant brain is a scientific phenomena, okay? They see leadership doing awful things, like directly cooking them, and they go, please, sir, please, my lord, I like it. More for me, more pain and suffering. That's what they say in England. And in America, they say, please, sir, please, my lord, more pain and suffering. It's just, that's it. That's literally it. They're like, I love tax cuts, please. Tax cuts for the wealthy. Well, one day I'll be fucking wealthy, so I want them tax cuts. Bruh, here in Missouri, I know people who want to go full libertarian on the government and they live in the fucking sticks and think that their lives will change for the better, just delusional. Yeah, libertarians living in fucking rural parts of Missouri start singing a very different tune when the post office is abolished and they can no longer get medication because the UPS is not going to deliver on those routes because there's no financial imperative to do so. They will not make profits. Okay, this is why libertarians are fucking baboons. Okay, they're stupid. And many Americans are just as stupid. Maybe not as stupid as libertarians or as horny for noncery. Okay, but still very stupid. If you are making less than $250,000 a year and you advocate for the Republican Party to win or you advocate for Republican positions, you are a moron of the fucking highest order. You are voting against your best interest. You are just stupid, and there is no way to have a conversation with you, okay? I can describe to you why you're stupid, but you will not understand it because you're a stupid person. That's it, literally. Most likely also racist. It's just the truth. Hell yeah, brother. Abolish the Department of Education. Hasan, this is not the high road. The high road, okay? I can't look at UK polling, UK opinion polling on the fucking Tory party after they adopted the most ginormously bad position on Brexit and capitulate to some fucking dingoes with a far right position and act like this is normal. You just called my entire city and family stupid? Okay, I'm sorry. Are they not? You're in here for 40 months. Do you feel like they're not? You're a 40-month subscriber. Why are you in here? Because you know they're stupid and you have nowhere else to go to share. Exactly. You have nowhere else where you can share these opinions. You probably first encountered someone like myself and went, what the fuck? People think like this? That's crazy. I thought I was alone. That's so many people. That's why I always laugh when people are like, we're going to outbreed the left. It's like, no, you're not, because so many leftists literally come from conservative families. Okay. No, they fucking grow up in that shit and they're like, this sucks. This is so dumb. We're living in fucking filth. Like, and we're advocating for our own demise. What is this? Anyway, please watch videos of English people being asked about politics and Brexit in rural areas in order to prove to your viewers that these people are stupid. I'm British and we all know they're dumbest people here. I swear part of it is the diet. Most of them eat nothing but potatoes, pies, and beer. Like, I also still feel bad for them, okay? But this is a moment where I'm heated, okay? I still feel bad for them. I feel bad because, like, they've been led astray by reactionary charlatans who know exactly how to tug on their fucking heartstrings and tell them, oh yeah, dude, look around. Things are worse, right? Things are worse. And it's not because of my cabinet and it's not because of my administration cutting your fucking social safety nets and making things insanely costly and ruining whatever semblance of like social mobility you might have had at a previous life. It is the fucking brown people. It's the Muslims. And a lot of those people go, well, I guess you're right. It must be the fucking Muslims and the Polish. In America, insert instead of Muslims, Mexicans. Okay. My libertarian father-in-law unironically believes that the USA will be a safer place if every single person carried a gun at all times. I love that because that means babies have to carry guns. The best way to ensure safety for children is by giving them a blicky. A baby with a blicky.
Back to the Conservatives. She therefore decides that what the country needs is another election. Her hope is to increase...
By the way, this is why we're all universally united along class boundaries, okay? This is something that you have to understand. And I know it's rich coming from me, okay, saying this like, oh, says you, rich guy. But like, the reality is I wasn't always, you know, I was, when I was growing up, very affluent, but there were definitely periods where I was on my own and wasn't, okay? Having said that, my point still stands, okay? You hate the hogs globally. It doesn't matter. There is no world in which you go, well, you know what? These hogs I actually do like. Unless we're talking about Israel, in which case you can be the most progressive person here in America. And then when it comes to Israel, you turn into a fucking Nazi. But that's a unique set of circumstances. That's like, you know, that's some other shit. We can't unpack that right now. I've unpacked it too many fucking times. Okay.
Majority in Parliament, and thus make it slightly easier to pass the various bills necessary to facilitate an orderly Brexit. Much like Cameron's gamble with the referendum, however, this is not what happens. The following election campaign is a car crash for May, who turns out to be almost impressively uncharismatic. At one point, she tells a reporter from ITV that the most rebellious thing she's ever done is run through a field of wheat. When questioned on policy, she has a habit of simply repeating stock slogans about the need for, quote, strong and stable government.
The result is that come election day, May doesn't secure the increased majority she expected, but loses seats instead.
Clinging onto power thus requires her to form a pact with the right-wing Democratic Unionist Party. Worse still, the parliament she's overseeing is now more fractured than ever. There's both relatively high representations from smaller parties and a set of increasingly stark factional divisions within each of the main parties, all of whom want something quite different out of Brexit. This means that gathering enough votes to pass a Brexit deal through Parliament becomes even more complicated than it was before. In November 2018, May announces that she's negotiated a withdrawal agreement with the EU, which will outline the future relationship between the UK and Europe. Nevertheless, the deal contains special protections in order to avoid the UK having to build a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And while these protections are intended to avoid any disruptions or complications to the Northern Irish peace process, for the most committed Brexiteers, they represent an unforgivable failure to completely detach from the EU. After 3 failed attempts to get her agreement through Parliament, May decides that she's had enough. Once again, the nation tunes in to watch a Conservative Prime Minister stand in front of 10 Downing Street and announce that they're going to walk away from their responsibilities. The fog of failure and defeat becomes harder to ignore.
With the UK's top job vacant once again, Boris Johnson decides that his time has come, and his fellow Conservatives clearly agree. He sweeps the subsequent leadership contest and officially takes over as Prime Minister on the 24th of July 2019.
Johnson's approach differs from May's in 2 key ways. Firstly, Johnson is far less worried about the prospect of a so-called no-deal Brexit, in which the country simply crashes out of the EU without having negotiated a future trading relationship with it. Secondly, he's much more ruthless in his attempts to outmaneuver his opponents.
In August 2019, Johnson takes the extreme decision to drive to Buckingham Palace and to persuade the Queen to effectively suspend Parliament for a month. His goal is partly to silence his critics within Parliament, but also to essentially run down the clock on Brexit negotiations, to the point either that the EU is forced to accept greater concessions on any deal, or that a no-deal Brexit happens by default.
This move has the effect of irritating basically everyone. The Supreme Court rules his suspension of Parliament to have been illegal, and Johnson is forced to return to a House of Commons that is somehow now even more divided than before. He thus decides that what the UK needs is another election. And this time, well, it actually does go to plan. Johnson campaigns using another 3 words.
Get Brexit done. Brexit means Brexit. Get Brexit done.
Slogan, get Brexit done. And to a nation exhausted by 3.5 years of trade talks and treaties, the notion of simply getting it over with clearly appeals. Johnson secures a landslide victory with 365 seats to Labour's 203.
When Johnson manages to renegotiate Theresa May's failed deal and get it passed through
Fun fact, Boris Johnson also pledged to invest in the NHS. Another thing to remember in this entire process, as in even the Conservatives at that point had recognized that yes, the Tory austerity measures were killing people. Okay, and were genuinely unpopular. Just, you know, did he do that? No, he didn't do that. Of course he didn't do that.
Parliament, it appears that Britain is firmly exiting its Brexit era. The consequences will certainly be felt for years to come, but the political wranglings at least begin to die down. And they do so just in time for a new challenge to appear in the form of COVID-19.
West Streeting defends Labour plan to use private sector to cut NHS backlog, by the way. Exclusive. Failure to do so would betray working class people, Shadow Health Secretary says. It's coming home, lads. He's also a transphobe. Brother, he's British. What do you mean? Like, that's like saying he also, hey, by the way, Hasan, I don't know if you know this, but he has a funny accent. Like, yeah, I know, he's British, okay? But like, yeah, he's a British MP, dude. Of course he's a fucking turf. That's a given. It's a requirement to be on the far right. This is not the far right. This is Labour. I understand your mistake for thinking that he's on the far right because you read the statements that he made and you thought, oh, this is a classic Tory move, privatizing the NHS. The problem is he's the Labour guy for the NHS.
First comes several weeks of watching the infection spread through China and Europe. Then, on the 30th of January 2020, the first 2 cases of COVID-19 are documented in Britain. Public health measures are introduced slowly at first. Reminders to wash hands, bans on large gatherings, mandated quarantine for people arriving in the UK from certain high-risk countries. Then, on the 23rd of March, Boris Johnson appears on national TV to announce a nationwide lockdown.
Johnson had initially been pretty sceptical about invoking such a measure. Ever the Conservative, he was worried about the impact that shutting everyone in their houses might have on business.
He briefly considered actively allowing the disease to spread across the country to build so-called herd immunity through infection. Nevertheless, with deaths rising exponentially, doing nothing eventually becomes untenable. With everyone stuck inside, glued to the TV, it's perhaps only right that politics becomes a bit of a soap opera over the next few months. First, Johnson himself contracts COVID, and swiftly goes,
Yeah, my controversial position on this is that they fucking cooked our boy, okay? They cooked our boy on some bullshit. But that is the power that British media has. It is literally, COVID also cooked our boy. He almost died, but that's besides the point, albeit very funny. It's just so funny that, like, this man, this monstrous piece of shit, was taken down for his tendency to have little parties, little gatherings at a time when he was telling people, you can't do that, actually. Like, Gavin Newsom is stronger than ever before. He was going to wineries and shit, okay, during COVID and hosting fucking orgies, okay? And this man was taken out for his little parties.
Being entirely unconcerned by the disease to lying in an intensive care unit in St. Thomas Hospital. Then, this guy, Johnson's chief advisor, Dominic Cummings, gets caught out for having broken lockdown rules by visiting his wife 5 hours away whilst displaying COVID symptoms. Amid these controversies, Johnson's allies in the Conservative Party find numerous ways to use the pandemic to funnel money into the wallets of their friends. It quickly becomes apparent that the country's National Health Service is going to need a whole load of additional masks, aprons, and other protective gear. Johnson & Co. thus leveraged this urgency to suspend anti-corruption laws around government outsourcing. Billions of pounds worth of public money is handed over to the friends and acquaintances of government ministers, in some cases in return for equipment which is entirely unusable.
Whether through illegitimate means or not, protecting the interests of business...
Just comically evil shit, dude. Just fucking comically evil shit, okay? Cummings' excuse for driving was that he was testing his eyesight. I love British politicians getting caught doing some shit because their answers are always the funniest answer. They never even just go, yeah, I fucked up, my bad. They literally always have an excuse, and the excuse is like a Rube Goldberg device. Like it is literally like they have like a whimsical gadget that they comprise in the form of an argument. Like Prince Andrew. Oh, I couldn't sweat. That other guy got caught watching porn. What did he say? Oh, I was looking at tractors. Looking up tractors in an adult website. Popped up. Very creative stuff.
Remains at the top of the government's agenda throughout the pandemic.
Efforts to keep things ticking over financially are led by this guy, Rishi Sunak.
Remember him from the beginning?
When the first national lockdown ends in summer 2020, all sense of caution is thrown out of the window in favour of getting things back to normal as soon as possible. In August, Sunak launches a scheme called Eat Out to Help Out. This sees the government subsidising meals bought in restaurants to encourage people to get out of their houses and support the hospitality sector. And people go for it, gobbling up 160 million state-subsidised meals between them. This might be good for Nando's and Pizza Express, but it's less good for anyone who wants the pandemic to be over. Sunak's scheme contributes to a near doubling of cases during that month, and very quickly, all the progress made throughout the first lockdown appears to be in vain, as cases begin to rise exponentially once more. Boris Johnson
English Crumpet says, this made McDonald's 50% off. I got so fat. With a name like English Crumpet, I love that. Oh, that's so perfect.
spends the rest.
Mate, you should have gotten a cheeky fucking Nando's, yeah? You should have spent your proper quids at cheeky fucking Nando's, not Macca's. What's wrong with you? Get some fucking yeah? Nando's macros are insane. Just get the rotisserie chicken. That's it. With some hot sauce.
Rest of the year trying and failing to avoid implementing further lockdowns. At one point,
I love the British chatters. There was a glitch in the Weatherspoons app where you could get a cheaper drink and a free panini. The Tesco meal deal.
he tells colleagues that he would rather let the bodies pile high than confine people to their homes again. Nevertheless, the rise in cases eventually becomes too significant to ignore, and the UK is subjected to 2 more national lockdowns during 2020 and 2021. The Conservative Party's lead in the polls, which had peaked at 22% whilst Johnson was in hospital, takes a bit of a tumble during these chaotic months of last-minute lockdowns. But by the spring, a successful COVID vaccine rollout puts Johnson on the up again. In May, the Conservatives win a historic by-election victory in Hartlepool, and things look stronger still. Sure, there might be a lack of lorry drivers and a shortage of basic foods in the supermarket as a result of Johnson's Brexit deal, but the politician known to many simply as Boris continues to have a broad base of support. Behind the scenes, he reportedly talks of wanting to remain in power for a decade.
Then it all comes crashing down.
In November 2022, the Daily Mirror publishes an article revealing that Boris Johnson and his staff had hosted several
Losing your fucking political career after, like, decades of being a racist, elitist, out of touch asshole and, like a regular run of the mill Tory in every other respect over what seems to be the shittiest, like, child's birthday party. Okay, there is nothing funnier than Boris Johnson's political end. Okay, I will never let go of this. He literally had the lamest fucking party. The lights were on, bro. It's not even like a dimly lit room. Like, the lights are on. You got the fluorescent fucking lights, and you're drinking like shitty ass champagne out of a fucking plastic glass with ice in it. It's just like. Oh my God. An office party? Like, you were having an office party. Not even blackface happened? I know. That was for the other
staff parties in 10 Downing Street the previous Christmas. This flew directly in the face of rules banning social gatherings, rules which had been drawn up in that very same building. The Prime Minister's office initially denies these reports, but footage and photos soon begin to emerge.
Do you see what I'm saying? Like, look at this. Like, that's the party, chat. Like, that's what led to his political demise, dude. There's not even a single titty out. Are you fucking kidding me? How was he an elitist? Genuinely? Boris Johnson? You are exactly the type of dude that his, like, idiotic antics actually appeals to if you don't recognize how he's a fucking elitist. Dude, Boris Johnson portrays himself as a dumbass. That motherfucker went to Eton and Oxford, as this video also correctly pointed to earlier, okay? And he was besties with David Cameron. He literally would, like, recite Omer in fucking Latin. Boris Johnson is abso-fucking-lutely a major elitist. He's also Turkish, which is why I have a soft spot for him. His real name is Alexander Boris de Pfeifel Johnson. Omer was Greek, you himbo. What do you... Or, okay, in the fucking... Wait, no, but he is Greek, but I think he was like... What did he... He recited something in Latin. Or maybe he recited in Greek, but I think he also would do shit like that. You have to remember, families were not able to see members in the hospital before they died. No, I know. It was the Iliad. Homer was Turkish. Yeah, just like Boris is.
All in all, 17 parties are found to have taken place among staff, and both Johnson and Rishi Sunak are eventually fined for breaking the law. Johnson's political career had rarely been without scandal. But the clear hypocrisy of the PM setting rules whilst ignoring them himself helps this one to stick. Even the usually die-hard...
I'm telling you, dude, they cooked him. It was the media that turned this into a major... They pounced on it, dude. They saw weakness and they fucking saw the blood in the water and they went on a feeding frenzy. Okay, that's kind of what's going on with Biden right now with American media. But of course, the American media is nowhere near as aggressive as British media is. If the Biden situation was happening in England right now, every fucking newspaper wall to wall would be like, dementia, demented president must step aside. Like, they do not fucking hold back, dude. They ate Boris up and Newsom keeps up English mind, can't comprehend. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Like, Gavin Newsom did that shit too. Other people did that shit too. The media tried to drop the story. No, they fucking didn't. They go nutty mode, dude. When they are, British media is so bloodless, so soulless. I don't, like, it's even worse than American media. And I fucking hate American media, as you guys know. Like, I'm telling you, they are really fucking bad, dude.
Conservative press begins to turn on him. Then, a few weeks later, Johnson attempts to promote an MP who's been credibly accused of multiple accounts of sexual assault, and his fellow MPs begin resigning from Johnson's government en masse. On the 8th of July 2022, the man who just recently had been eyeing up a decade in power is forced to make that now iconic, shameful walk out the front door of 10 Downing Street to announce his resignation.
I mean, yeah, that tracks, by the way. The Economist cover. That's a British publication. You want to know how the British cover American politics, dude? That's it, dude. Like, yeah. Now imagine that's like across the board. Like, that's the Washington Post. You know what I mean? That's the New York Times. If American media was like British media, every newspaper, serious newspaper, with the exception of like one or two, every newspaper would be the New York Post. Okay?
Leaves the country with one more three-word phrase for good measure. Them's the breaks.
It had once seemed almost certain that whenever Boris Johnson did retire, he'd be succeeded by Rishi Sunak. Regardless of the disaster of he out to help out, Sunak had gone to great lengths to use COVID to further his personal brand.
But remember all those MPs that Boris Johnson had expelled from the Conservative Party during the Brexit debates? Well, those expulsions, along with the broader polarisation of the Brexit process, had led many of the party's more socially liberal members to jump ship. The result being that the party is now comprised almost solely of hardline right-wingers and libertarians.
Oh, the beautiful lords. Our lords. This guy got owned. Didn't he lose his seat as well? My lordship Rees-Mogg lost his fucking seat. He got mugged.
Sunak does throw his hat in the ring then. The contest is eventually won by this woman, Liz Truss. Now, as we've already seen, the Conservative Party has always been a party of low taxes and cuts to government spending. But Liz Truss is something else. A one-time contributor to a book called Britannia Unchained, Truss is an unabashed, unreformed libertarian who doesn't so much believe in a small state as no state. Unless, of course, it's serving the needs of the super-rich. In fact, Truss turns out to be so extreme in her low-tax fundamentalism that she almost bankrupts the entire country in just a matter of weeks.
Goals.
On the 23rd of September...
Goals, honestly. That was so goated. She killed the queen and bankrupt the nation and fucked off, dude. It's girl boss behavior and you don't understand it, okay?
2022, Truss unveils a package of economic policies which revolve around £45 billion worth of tax cuts to the country's richest. And remember, this is a country which has already suffered more than a decade of austerity.
It's pretty crazy to think that she did all of that in such a short period of time. Girls get it done, folks. Girls get it done. Okay, she almost ended capitalism in 3 weeks. She ended the monarchy and capitalism in 3 weeks.
And in which every public service, from the NHS to the police, is at crisis point. So she decides to fund these tax cuts through increased government borrowing.
Global financial markets usually quite like tax cuts, but Truss's approach is viewed as so bold as to be reckless. Investors quickly come to view holding investments in the UK as far too risky and start selling off government bonds and currency.
The value of the pound plummets, and more importantly for the Conservative Party, interest rates on mortgages begin to rise. The result is that any support for Truss among MPs, party members and voters falls through the floor. The Daily Star posts a live stream of a lettuce on YouTube, wagering that Truss's failure is so bad that she'll resign before the lettuce will.
Oh, so good.
And a few days later, the lettuce claims victory. Just 49 days after she first entered, Truss walked back out of 10 Downing Street and, you guessed it, resigns. In doing so, she becomes the shortest-serving Prime Minister in UK history. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Truss's chaotic leadership
It's so funny. Like, what the fuck was she thinking? What the fuck was she thinking? It's just so awesome. God. She said women back 5 decades.
sees the Conservatives' polling numbers drop to new lows. Labour had first taken the lead during Partygate, but the gap has now widened to the point.
It's crazy because, like, this is such a great video about not just how Britain became a poor country. I thought he was more so going to focus like on austerity and stuff like that. But this is literally why Keir Starmer and the Labour Party got the landslide victory in spite of Keir Starmer. Okay. Many of you were asking the question, like, how the fuck did Keir Starmer, like, how did Labour finally secure a victory? 14 years of austerity, a shit ton of drama and mismanagement. Okay.
That the Conservatives are a full 30 points behind. For once then, the party decides that the country doesn't need another election. MPs line up to support Rishi Sunak in taking over the top job, and on the 25th of October 2022, he becomes Prime Minister of the UK. Sunak tries time and again to rekindle the UK's love affair with the Conservatives. At the beginning of 2023, he makes 5 promises to the British people, mostly based on getting the economy moving again. Nevertheless, progress on these is patchy. The only target which actually gets met is his promise to bring down inflation, but that's more to do with falling energy prices than anything he's done himself.
After some initial movement in the right direction then, support for Sunak and the Conservatives continues to slide. And the more that Sunak's attempts to win back voters from the Labour Party are met with failure, the more he decides simply to double down on trying to hold on to these small...
While you're on the wave of bashing Tory MPs, what are your thoughts on Tony Blair? I thought he was shit. He's the reason why Labour shifted to the right, and also he unabashedly supported the Iraq War, but his historical rankings by political scientists is actually very high. Yeah, because political scientists are fucking stupid. They love a fucking centrist, especially coming from like the left. 14 years of Tory leadership. Okay? Takes one to know one, poli-sci major. I'm just...
...from the voters that his party has retained.
This involves leaning into the very worst right-wing obsessions. Sunak and his allies begin devising increasingly cruel punishments for asylum seekers and blocking access to healthcare for trans people. Sunak tries to hold on for...
Chatter cooked you a little, lol. Gagged. Wait, what?
...for as long as he can,
yeah,
hoping for some kind of miracle. But at this point, it's just too late. After 14 years in power, more than £100 billion in cuts to public services, one Brexit referendum, countless corrupt COVID PPE deals, and a self-inflicted economic crisis, the consequences of Conservative governance are plain for all to see. A country which has been asset stripped by austerity, cut off from its closest trading partners, and in which spiking inflation and interest rates have sent rents, mortgages, bills, and pretty much everything else through the roof, at the same time as real terms wages have fallen.
I think England needs to grind harder, dude. That's what it is. What England needs is Sigma Grindset podcasters, okay? I'm not seeing enough momentum from England's Sigma Grindset podcasters. This way, they would be able to pay off their rent. They would even be able to pay off and also tip their landlords, okay? Yeah, get to work. Start drop shipping, okay? What are we doing here? Yeah. Oh, rent went up. What are you going to do? Not fucking live in a house? You have to. So what are you supposed to do? Well, that's right. You're supposed to fucking get on your Sigma shit. Get on your grind set. Knowledge. Start drop shipping immediately.
22nd of May 2024 then, Sunak finally gives up. He steps outside 10 Downing Street, walks up to his podium and stares down the lens of that press ball camera. This is not a resignation, but it certainly feels like one.
It's hard to stress how impressive the complete and total implosion of the Conservative Party is. The UK sometimes gets described as having a two-party political system, given to how the Conservative and Labour parties dominate election results. But in practice, it basically has a one-party system.
Of the past 100 years, the Conservative Party has been in power for more than 70 of them.
And now you understand why England is so fucking poor, dude. Now you understand why England is so goddamn poor while simultaneously so rich, right? It's so fucking rich. London is so rich. How did it get that way? How are so many wealthy people living in London and yet England is so unimaginably broke? I wonder how this happened. How could this have happened? One must ask the question, how could this have happened? 70% of the last century with Tory leadership, and these dumb motherfuckers still vote for it, which is crazy. And when they don't vote for it, they're voting for a lighter red Tory version, a light Tory version in the Labour Party. It's awesome.
I'm recording, it looks pretty certain that same party is going to lose the next election big time. Perhaps that's already happened by the time you're watching this video. But whether the party eventually bounces back from that defeat or not, the experiments they've inflicted on the country have left damage which will last a long, long time. Perhaps most worrying is the extent to which some of the basic precepts of those experiments have come to be accepted by Sunak's rivals in the Labour Party. On the 4th of July, it looks very likely that it will be Labour leader Keir Starmer walking into 10 Downing Street as the new Prime Minister. Starmer has repeatedly criticised Liz Truss's disastrous reforms and Boris Johnson's lies. Nevertheless, he's completely walked back on his earlier support for a referendum on rejoining the EU, and he remains committed to an economic approach grounded in austerity.
In the same way that David Cameron once waved that note stating that there was no money left.
Bro, you got the fucking mandate, dude. What are you doing? The people are like, bro, we're broke. We're dying. Please help us. And he's like, well, I will not be helping you. We're going to continue the austerity regime of the Tories that you seemingly loved so much for 14 years.
Keir Starmer has repeatedly used Liz Truss's trashing of the economy as a reason to scale back his promises.
His manifesto retains most of the Conservatives' cuts to welfare, has a much less ambitious approach to tackling climate change than he once promised, and suggests the party will promote further privatisation of the NHS. In fact, where you would think an election campaign would mostly revolve around the two main parties criticising each other over their specific plans for government, the current contest has largely consisted of each party criticising the other for daring to want to spend any money, which is a problem. Because after 14 years of cuts and mismanagement, the UK needs investment, and lots of it. Last year, one researcher at the Institute for Public Policy suggested that the UK had contracted a debilitating case of investment phobia, in which the government refuses to invest in infrastructure, which leads to businesses not wanting to invest either.
Combine that with the country having been cut off from its closest trading partners and a crisis of trust in politics, and you end up with a country that feels so much poorer than it once did. Fixing that is going to be one hell of a task, and the challenge for Keir Starmer is that if he can't make a very real difference to people's lives pretty quickly, then he might find that his party's popularity is pretty short-lived. As many of you will know, the UK election isn't the only election taking place this year.
Right.
In November, our American friends will also be Pokemon going to the polls.
Oh, chill. Okay, don't do it. Don't do it, Tom. Don't do it, man. Don't bring that up. No. We're having fun right now. We're laughing at across the pond. Let's not remind ourselves of what's going on in the United States of America. Don't worry about that. Remember England and how cooked the British are? That was cool. Don't do that. It's effing. It's effing. The broadcast won't let me cover this. Oh, man.
Select the next president of the United States.
And I'm going to be heading over to the US to cover it.
In fact, if you're watching this video shortly after it comes out, there's a good chance I'm currently either in Milwaukee, chatting to folks at the Republican National Convention, or scooting around the US on my way to New York, Washington, Florida, and a handful of other places to chat to some people there.
The filming that I'm going to be doing whilst I'm out there is all for my upcoming feature-length documentary, Boomers. Boomers is going to be the biggest thing that I've ever made.
It's being produced by Nebula, the creator-owned streaming service that I've been part of for the past few years.
That means that it's got a much larger budget than we're usually able to work with, which is how I'm able to spend the best part of 3 weeks trekking around the US. It's also allowing me to work with some...
Yeah, I'm gonna link up with him. Anyway, that's pretty sick. I'm glad I watched the end of that because I just hit him up to link up with him. Carolina and Cinemarxism are going to the DNC convention. Yeah, I'm going to the DNC convention as well. I'm actually planning on going to the RNC convention as well, which would be next week. La, 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 no.